Bonjour, very bonjour. Can you hear me? Can I continue in French? Michela, are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Rebonjour, je disais que nous sommes très heureux ce matin depuis Dakar pour pouvoir animer cette session. Je suis là avec des confrères journalistes venus de partout en Afrique de l'Ouest, notamment la CENOZO, qui est notre organisation sous-régionale qui assure la promotion du journalisme d'investigation. Alors, ce matin, je vais aller très vite. Nous recevons Michela qui va nous parler de son livre qu'elle projette de lancer dans quelques mois, mais déjà l'exclusivité, elle nous en réserve la primauté et elle a souhaité en parler ce matin pendant cette conférence africaine de journalisme d'investigation. Michela Rong, qui est-elle? C'est une journaliste, notre consoeur. Elle a écrit sur l'Afrique sur pas mal de thématiques. Déjà en tant que journaliste correspondant pour l'agence Reuters, elle était basée en Côte d'Ivoire et l'ancien Zaïre. Et ensuite, comme correspondant de Financial Times Africa, et elle était basée au Kenya. Et donc, du journalisme, elle a glissé dans l'écriture de livres.
Et Rwanda post-genocide period. She then moved to Kenya, Africa's correspondence for the Financial Times. Her book includes, I believe, we lost the speaker. I believe the connection of David. Oh, David is back. Okay, so her book includes the footstep of Mr. Kurz, the story of Mobutu. I didn't do it for you, focusing on Eritrea. It's our turn to eat the story of Kenyan whistleblower John Gitongo and Borderlines, a novel set in the Horn of Africa. She writes for The Guardian, in New York Times, and Spectator, is regularly asked to comment on African current affairs by BBC, Al Jazeera and CNN. So this morning, Michela is going to talk about her book, and she's going to speak about Patrick Karegeya.
So it's in that I have to talk in English. So unfortunately, my colleagues here can't understand all I'm saying. So let me continue in English. I was saying Michela has been journalist across Africa, and she knows very well the context in West Africa, Ivory Coast. She was in the correspondent of Reuters. And now she's based in London. And then she decided to write about Rwanda. So let me ask Michela, why this this book who is telling about Rwanda? So
oui, bonjour.
The title is very expressive. So.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Merci David. Merci pour l'introduction. Je vais parler en anglais. Alors, je fais mes excuses aux membres francophones de notre public parce que je suis une Anglaise. Alors, pour moi, c'est plus facile de parler en anglais. And I know we have simultaneous translation. So thank you for asking that question, David. Thank you for the introduction. Basically, this book, which we're going to be talking about, is called Do Not Disturb, Ne Pas Déranger, which is the sign that you put on the door of a hotel when you don't want people to go into your room. And it was triggered by the death of Patrick Karegeya, the murder of Patrick Karegeya, who was the former head of external intelligence for Rwanda. And he was someone who was much more than just the head of external intelligence in Rwanda. He was very, very close to President Paul Kagame. He was the person who often acted as a de facto foreign minister for Rwanda. He had been with the movement, the Rwandan Patriotic Front, since the start, since the invasion of Rwanda in 1990. But he had fallen out with Kagame. He had lost faith in the whole project. He had begun to feel that Kagame had become a dictator. He had fled the country in fear for his own life, fled to South Africa, set up an opposition party, and he was lured up to a hotel room in the Michelangelo Hotel in South Africa on New Year's Eve 2013. And there was a squad of killers who ambushed him in the room and strangled him to death. So this was a very lurid murder, very high profile. Everyone was really shocked. But Patrick was someone I had got to know, like many of the journalists who used to cover Rwanda. We met Patrick. He used to sort of tell us how marvelous his administration was and what they were doing in the region. And so it seemed amazing that this man who had been so close to the president, he had even been to school with the president, his friends were, his children, the president, should end up being murdered. All the evidence indicated that he had been murdered by his old friend on the orders of his old friend. So I thought that was a book that needed to be told, because what became very clear to me as I investigated the story was that this was just one of the most high profile of murders carried out by the Rwandan government outside its own territory. There, of course, had been a series of disappearances, of massacres outside in Congo in the 1990s, and also a series of massacres as the Rwandan Patriotic Front had taken power in 1990. But what was what had changed over the years was this developing operation of targeted assassination of people that the regime regarded as threats and who had fled abroad, like Patrick Karegeya. He wasn't the only one. He was just one of the better known figures. And as that list of victims included people like him who were insiders of the regime who turned into political opponents, but they also included journalists who were writing critically about the regime. They included human rights investigators. They included judges. And just activists. So it seemed that the Rwandans were becoming less and less tolerant of any form of criticism, any form of contestation to Paul Kagame. And often these attacks were organized, always, I think, these attacks were being organized by the High Commission, the Rwandan High Commission in the country concerned. And I think the reason I use the title "Do Not Disturb," ne pas déranger, is because I realized that like many of the investigations one does as a journalist, you realize that you're describing something that everybody knows. Everyone who is well informed knows about what you're describing. But it's something that they talk about amongst themselves. Diplomats knew about it. Members of the intelligence communities in the West knew about it. NGO workers knew about it. Development officials knew about it, but there seemed to be an agreement not to make a big fuss about it. So when Putin did similar things in Britain and sent killers to assassinate a former agent here on British soil, there was a big fuss, and the Russians were held to account, and ties have been strained ever since between the British government and the Russian government. Similarly, when Jamal Khashoggi was killed and dismembered in Istanbul by intelligence agents sent by the Saudi government, there was a massive fuss. But when Rwanda did very, very similar things, there was not a big fuss. And that's why I think it made such an interesting book, because it was in part, it gave me a chance to sort of examine why there wasn't a big fuss when these things happened. So maybe I can just run through some of the challenges that I found when I was writing this book. The main challenge writing it was the fear of my sources, who were in many cases petrified. And these were people who often interviewing in Uganda, in Brussels, in Paris, in America, in South Africa, here in London. And you would have thought that these people would have felt safe. They were outside Rwanda. Yes, they were criticizing the government, but you would have thought that they had refugee status or they'd taken foreign nationality, that they would have felt safe and able to talk openly to someone like myself. And they didn't. And in fact, it was always really difficult to persuade people to talk to you. They were aware that they felt that their emails were being read. They didn't say anything interesting on emails. They didn't trust WhatsApp. They didn't trust Skype. So you had to really see them face to face, which obviously meant I did a lot of traveling. And at the start, I remember thinking, gosh, these people are rather paranoid. And then, of course, as I realized just how many attacks there had been and how consistent the attempt to silence dissidents and really bully people into self-censoring themselves, that it was very understandable. And as for sort of being tracked on email or on the phone, what we've had over the summer, we've seen with the Pegasus investigation that one of the African clients of NSO, very enthusiastic clients, is Rwanda. And it's almost certain, I mean, they have officially denied it, but it's almost certain that they were using Pegasus, this spyware, to track, they were tracking Cyril Ramaphosa, the president of South Africa, even during the period where supposedly they were improving strained relations with the government, relations that had been strained by the murder of Patrick Karegeya, amongst other attacks. But they were also monitoring the political leadership of neighboring Congo and monitoring the military leadership of Uganda. So my sources' fear was entirely justified. And I learned the protocol, how you go about meeting people, how you try and protect them. I learned to use encrypted emails. I learned not to say anything on WhatsApp that was at all indicative, to keep my circumstances and my whereabouts discreet, not to identify where they were, and above all, never to meet one of my sources anywhere but in the public, so that there were always witnesses. Because of course, Patrick Karegeya's big mistake was that he went into a hotel room alone with his killers. Sorry, David, did you say something? Can I just continue?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So it is very interesting. But I say that people will ask so much about this book, very interesting book. But now I'm continue to asking myself, how did you do it? Where and how did you find your case sources? It is very important to know. And maybe you will ask about when the book will be published or will be available for public. So you can continue.
Okay, well, firstly, the book is already available. It's been published, it was published in April. It's been on sale in the US and in the Commonwealth, which includes Africa, of course, since April. You can buy an ebook, you can buy an audiobook. I mean, one of the problems is that bookshop, there's only really one major bookshop in Kigali, and they won't sell the book. And there's also a key bookshop in Kampala and in Uganda, neighboring Uganda, and they don't want to sell the book either. So I think people are, I know there's a pirated copy that is doing the rounds of the ebook. I won't ever make any money at all. But you know, there are the bookshops in Tanzania, in Kenya, in all the bookshops in South Africa already selling the book in English. There's going to be a French version. I'm very, very keen that there should be a French version, because obviously very large part of the Rwandan public is Francophone, and that will be coming out next year. I don't know exactly when, but it'll be coming out next year. So the book is already available. Identifying who to talk to. Well, one of the key things, as I said I think often when you're doing investigative journalism, people think that you uncover, you have a sort of great scoop and you discover all these things that nobody has ever discovered before. In my experience, because this is not the first piece of investigative book writing I've done, I also did one in Kenya about a corruption scandal called Anglo Leasing. In my experience, these kind of books, you're often saying, as I said, what everyone knows. And with the Rwandan case, there has been overwhelming evidence of this phenomenon I describe, and it has come up in court many, many times, because there have been, court cases in South Africa brought against people who attempted to kill General Kayumba Nyamwasa, another high-profile Rwandan refugee. All sorts of interesting things come up during court cases. They are always worth attending. That's what I've learned as a journalist. The inquest into Patrick Karagaya's death, which took place while I was researching my book, was a fascinating source of information. And what it revealed was that the South African Hawks had known from the get-go, who, they were of the absolutely, firm belief that the Rwandan government was behind the attack on General Kayumba Nyamwasa, the attempt to kill him in 2010, and behind South Africa's parliamentarians as such, and had said there's no point pursuing things because we know who did this, and they've left the country. In the end, there were 2 arrest warrants issued nonetheless, despite that sort of rather limp response from the Hawks. But there is a lot that comes up in court. There have been court cases brought in Sweden against diplomats who have been caught spying on the Rwandan community there. The other key piece of information that I was very grateful for was the fact that a lot of these dissidents who went abroad from Rwanda and set up opposition parties realized that Kigali, the government in Kigali, was sending out killers to try and take them out. And there were a lot of conversations between the intelligence services in Rwanda, who were calling refugees or agents, former military personnel who were living in the countries concerned in the diaspora. And they would be calling these people and saying, we want you to kill these people. We want you to take them out. It's your job as a patriot and a citizen of Rwanda to help us eliminate this man as an enemy of the state, and you need to do that. And in many, many cases, the people who had been contacted by intelligence in Kigali would be horrified at the idea that they were supposed to organize the death of people that they often were on friendly terms with or had absolutely no grudge against. And they would go to these high-profile former insiders, people like Patrick Karagaya, people like General Kayumba Nyamwasa, and say, I'm being asked to kill you. What should I do? And they said, the general and Patrick Karagaya said, let's tape the conversations. So there was a series of audio recordings that were then released by the dissidents onto the internet. And you can listen to them anytime you like. They're all on the internet. And this was very strong evidence. So the evidence has been out in the public domain for years. And all I'm doing in the book, in large part, is putting it all together and draw it, and making the connections. But the evidence has been available for a very long time.
So thank you, Michela. I think people will ask so many questions about your book. Maybe if you have something more to say, you can do it before to allow people to ask. Yeah. Do you have something
well,
more
I think,
to talk?
Yeah. I think the other point I wanted to make is it's always difficult when you are doing this kind of investigative journalism, you're often dealing with information that comes from military intelligence or intelligence services. And I think one of the biggest challenges I faced in this book was that the people who were my key sources had in the past said extremely different things in public. When they had been briefing diplomats, when they had been briefing journalists like myself, they had presented a completely different picture of Rwanda, including, for example, this very contentious incident of who brought down the plane in which Juvenal Habyarimana was killed. Because they had been on the inside at the time, and they had been giving the narrative and the line of the Rwandan government of the day. And now they were in exile, and they were saying completely the opposite. And in fact, they were saying, well, that was the line that we sold you. And we were, you know, in some cases they were saying, we were amazed that you fell for it so easily. This is actually why I wrote the book, because I wanted to sort of be honest about the fact that on Rwanda, I think there have been many, many misconceptions and a distorted narrative that was very successfully peddled abroad, that was embraced by journalists, by diplomats, by NGO workers, development people. And I wanted to say, yeah, you know, there are various things that are really fundamentally wrong with this narrative. And one of the key things is that the people who originally fabricated it are now saying it was a lie. So that obviously presents some problems, because you're quoting people and saying, you know, these people are unreliable witnesses. They lied in the past. And then the question becomes, are they lying now? And this question comes up repeatedly with my book. And I think, you know, my response to that is simply that you have to just be honest and sort of say, this is what they used to say, this is what they say now, and this is the evidence. You can never say with a book of this kind, I know 100% what happened. All you can say is that versions have changed, and there's a lot of corroborating evidence for the current version. And the other point that I make in the book is, I think that whistleblowers, you know, by their very nature, in this case, you were having people who were blowing the whistle on a regime where they had enormous status, nice, generous salaries, lovely houses they lived in, you know, their futures were assured. And now they were living in exile. They'd lost all their assets. They'd been asset stripped by the government since they left. They'd lost their citizenship. They were, you know, wanted on terrorism charges. And, you know, which of these two positions in life is likely to encourage someone to be honest and truthful? And my thesis would be that when you've lost everything and you no longer have a dog in the game, you know, you're not hoping and expecting the president to promote you, you're not hoping and expecting your wife to sort of launch some company that's going to do very well because it has the blessing of the First Lady. I think you're more likely to be honest. So, I mean, I think that's the nature of the whistleblowing phenomenon, that whistleblowers have lost a lot, or they have grievances, but they are all the more compelling for that reason.
Thank you, Michela. Very good experience you had with this book, and I'm gonna ask to people who are following this session. There are any questions to ask to Michela? Yeah. So even my colleagues here from West Africa can ask in French. I see Michela will answer in English, no problem. So who wanna ask questions to Michela? Quelqu'un a une question? C'est vrai que tout a été dit en anglais, pratiquement. Oui, Ignace from Senozo will want to ask a question. Ignace, please come in this side to ask. No problem. Michela will understand you perfectly in French. Yeah. Okay.
Ok, moi, je m'appelle Ignace Sossou, je suis moi, je travaille à Singapore. Votre expérience, qu'est-ce que vous pensez aujourd'hui est-ce que aujourd'hui les journalistes sont alarmés traque, dont ils peuvent et quel conseil vous avez
David, I didn't hear that. Can you repeat, David, what the question was? I'm afraid I didn't hear it.
About Pegasus, sorry, what do you think about this this great topic around the world, Pegasus?
Pegasus, what do I think? I think, again, it's another example of an investigation which has shown what, in Rwanda at least, was already known. I mean, if you spoke to anyone who was in opposition or in the diaspora or a journalist or an official of Rwanda, they always, when they're inside Rwanda, they feel they're being watched all the time and monitored. But certainly they were all very aware that their phones could not be trusted, that their emails were not secure, and they would never say anything over the phone that would be helpful to someone who might be trying to track them down. You would always meet them in a public place, and often I had this experience where you would go to a cafe and you would look for the Rwandan source that you had agreed to meet, and then you would get a phone call on your phone and the person would say, I'm actually in the cafe next to where you're sitting. I just wanted to make sure you turned up on your own. So people were very aware that they were being monitored long before the Pegasus investigation revealed the details of all these lists of thousands of numbers that were almost certainly being tracked by Rwanda using this software. So I think it was very good that that was a confirmation. And I think it's a similar, we know that there are other governments in Africa that have been using this technology. Ethiopia in particular has been using it very assiduously, and it's been using it to target the opposition and to silence dissent and to target journalists. But it wasn't a surprise. I think it was just reassuring to finally have confirmation, because the trouble is otherwise people will always say, oh, you're paranoid. Oh, you're making it up. Of course nobody's following you. Oh, the trouble with you political exiles is you think you're so important. And instead we know that in fact, governments like Rwanda are making use of this technology in exactly the way that people suspected they were for years and years.
Okay, thank you. So unfortunately, I can't translate exactly what you were saying about to Ignace. So he was asking about also what are advices with your great experience, what advices you have to provide to journalists about surveillance.
About surveillance. I think what I know from the journalists that I speak to is you have to keep, what they do is they keep changing the numbers they use and they keep changing the email addresses they use. So for example, they use something called Proton Mail, which is encrypted. It's free. You don't have to pay for it. I'm pretty sure. I think it's free. It's called Proton Mail and it's encrypted. So that's a secure way of communicating with other people. And the Rwandan journalists I know, what they do is they change numbers all the time. They change their numbers and, but obviously if you're a journalist, that's a very difficult thing to do, because it means that all your contacts, when you then phone them, they don't know who's phoning them. And in a country, in your environment where you're a group of very suspicious exiles, and you get a call from someone whose a number you can't identify, you will tend not to pick it up. So it's a real problem. And I think, what we're seeing is the way, this technology has been used to very, very negative effect. And it has really been used to silence journalism and to silence dissent in Africa extremely successfully. It's very cynical, the way in which this technology has been sold. And, supposedly it's being used against terrorists and people who have, military designs on overturning the state. It's not being used for that at all. So I was very pleased when that investigation came out this summer. But my fear is that, having exposed Pegasus, And then now I understand that Apple has just introduced some technology, an app, I think, that you can download to stop Pegasus working on your iPhone if you own an iPhone. Of course, the people who designed Pegasus will just come up with a new form of technology that does the same thing. It's not the only program that offers this service. So I'm afraid that, people in the opposition and journalists are always, and human rights activists are always going to be trying to stay one step ahead. And they don't have the resources and the funding that makes it possible to do that. So it's a real problem. And I think all you can do is hope that if there are enough people in the opposition and enough journalists writing critical articles, the governments won't be able to keep up with them, and there will be, people will get forgotten, and all the tracking will not be complete. But when you have a small country like Rwanda and a small population and a very limited number of journalists, activists, and opposition people, it becomes very easy to target them. So I think it's very, very sinister and very malevolent, this technology.
Thank you, Michela. Ignace, je pense en gros, elle souhaiterait, c'est vrai qu'il n'y a pas de risque zéro, mais elle souhaiterait que les journalistes aillent davantage vers les messageries cryptées. À la CNOSO, nous avons eu beaucoup de sessions par rapport à ces messageries, à ces formules d'échange confidentielles. Elle préconise Proton Mail. Nous, on sait qu'il y a aussi PGP et il y a d'autres formules qu'on peut utiliser pour vraiment, en tant que journaliste, sécuriser nos échanges. So I'm gonna ask to other people who want to ask Michela. I don't know, Kenya, Ethiopia, Nigeria, South Africa. Do you have any question to Michela?
Hello, am I audible?
Do you have any question? Okay.
Yes, thanks very much. I was just wondering what kind of reaction, if any, there'd been in Rwanda to the book.
Okay, I'll answer it, right? The response has been vitriolic. I'm hearing myself on feedback. The response has been vitriolic, and if you want to get a flavor of it, you can go on to Twitter and just do @Michela Wrong, all one word, and you'll see. So Kagame initially, when he was asked about my book by a journalist working for Jeune Afrique, said, "Oh, it's all rubbish, des bêtises." He used the word bêtises. Stupidities, but everyone should just read it for themselves and they'll dismiss it, which I thought was a very kind of cool reaction, and what I would have advised him to say if I had been working for a public relations organization. And we do know, by the way, that the Rwandans employ extremely expensive British and UK public relations firms, and firms that specialize in reputation management, as it's called. More recently, he gave a long interview to Rwanda's national television broadcaster, in which he was asked about my book. And first of all, he pretended that he didn't know my name or what the book was about. And then he made some extraordinary claims. He claimed that it was a very personal account because I was the lover of the main protagonist. He then talked about how it was a well-known fact that I was being sponsored by a neighboring country, which I have to take as a reference to neighboring Uganda, and other countries as well further to the north. So basically he was saying, that I was a whore and a foreign agent, which is exactly the accusations that had been made on Twitter for months, ever since the book came out. Very specific, I was paid $330,000 by the Ugandans to write this. I'm the lover of Yoweri Museveni. I was the lover of so-and-so. And you just sort of think, to me, the misogyny and the crudity of this response is just staggering. And it tells you more about the Rwandan government than really anything in my book. And I think, the really telling thing is that never in any of these responses that I've seen coming from the presidential spokeswoman, or all these, they have a lot of trolls who are basically employed by military intelligence or the police force. In Rwanda, they're called the Rwanda Twitter Army, and they're at work, very hard at work every single day. Never have they actually confronted the claims I make in the book, in which I say there is an international assassination program to take out high-profile dissidents, human rights activists, and journalists, and here are the victims. And I find that really, really telling, because if they could have rebutted those claims, they would have, but they can't, so then they just sort of turn on me and portray me as the sort of sluttish foreign agent, which is extraordinary. But anyway, so that's been the reaction. There is no such thing really as a free press in Rwanda. The New Times, which is privately funded supposedly, is really just the government voice piece. And then there are a series of extremely energetic, vocal, vitriolic trolls. I mean, I know them all their names, who just endlessly tweet government propaganda. There was a very interesting article in the Rwandan press a couple of months ago, in which it turns out that the ruling party, the Rwandan Patriotic Front, is actually staging courses for young Rwandans who want to join the party in how to become an active user of Twitter. And other social media, Instagram and Facebook. So it's basically, and it's handing out certificates at the end of this course, encouraging people to go out. It's handing out certificates and smartphones. So basically they are training people to become trolls, to pile into people like me. And I can see, because I do follow my profile, that there's a whole bunch of new people now who've never they have minute followings. They have 34 people, 54 people who are now tweeting on the subject of me and my book, because they're sort of demonstrating to the government that they're doing a good job. And I imagine they hope they'll get rewarded accordingly.
Okay, Michela, we have a question from Ethiopia. Ethiopia can ask.
Sorry, can you say that again, David?
Yes.
Thank you very much, Michela, and facilitator. And thank you very much for writing this book. I have two questions, actually. Did you travel to Rwanda while you are writing this book or while investigating? And were there any incidents of security people following you or recognized that you are writing about this murder? And the other thing is, can you tell us a little bit in detail about the process of writing this book so that we can learn from it, because we have lots of important people murdered and the case were unknown here as well. Thank you.
Yes, those are big questions. I had to make a choice at a certain stage while I was researching this book as to whether I was going to continue going into Rwanda. Because what I knew was that the community, the Rwandan diaspora community, is small and it remains in touch with people back home. And I knew that if I was interviewing high-profile dissidents in South Africa, in Brussels, in France, in the States, which I was going to their conferences, I was having interviews with them, I was attending their memorial services after Patrick Karegeya's death, that would very quickly be known in Kigali. So right at the start of my research, I think in 2016, I went and did a trip to Rwanda. I met some old friends while I was there. I visited the museums. I didn't stage high-profile interviews because I didn't want to reveal my hand at that stage. And then I thought about going back later on in my research when I had done all these very lengthy interviews with the members of Patrick Karegeya's family, with other high-profile members of the dissident community, with General Kayumba. And I felt I was very aware that Kigali would know I was researching the book by then, because word would have got back to them. And I felt that I would be watched, monitored, and tracked throughout my time there. And I also felt that I would be putting anyone I tried to interview in danger by simply by being with them, because, you know, I wouldn't have been able to meet them secretly. You can't do anything secret in Rwanda. And I would have been putting them in danger, and they wouldn't have been able to tell me anything interesting. So I had major doubts. I did think about it a lot. And then I finally had a conversation in which I discovered that Sean Abrahams, who was the prosecutor on General Kayumba Nyamwasa's attempted murder case, had actually been warned while after he had played that role as the state prosecutor. He had been due to give a speech at a conference in Cape Town, and he had been told by South African intelligence not to go and give that speech because his life was in danger, because there were lots of Rwandans who were enrolling for that event, and the South African intelligence believed that an attempt was going to be made on his life by one of the members of that state prosecutor. Then me as a journalist, acting on my own without the sort of protection that someone like Sean Abrahams benefits from, I wasn't going to go into Rwanda. So that sort of decided it for me. I didn't go back. So that's the answer to the first bit of your question. The other question, how do you research a book like this? I think one of the things is when you have this community of people who are living in exile. I mean, most of the people I was interviewing were people who had been within the regime and were now outside it and outcast and in fear for their lives. There comes a point where they are very open, and they'll just tell you everything because they've lost everything. And they were happy to be quoted, which was great. The problem I had was people who were still, you know, in Uganda, Rwanda, South Africa, in the development community, in the diplomatic community, who hadn't lost everything, and who still, for example, in the diplomatic community, former ambassadors, Western ambassadors, who were hoping to go back and work as consultants in Rwanda, academics, Western academics who were researching books on Rwanda or papers on Rwanda and wanted to be able to go back there. People in the development community who were often involved in projects, and they didn't want to be quoted in any form or substance. And it was extremely frustrating because, of course, with a contentious subject, you want to be able to quote people to back up what you're saying, and they're telling you fascinating things, but you really want to be able to quote them. And, you know, it was made very clear to me by so many people, I'll tell you these things, but you can never quote me. And so, you know, people have pointed out that in my reference notes at the back of the book, it's a lot of sort of anonymity requested next to the names of the people I interviewed, but there was no other way around it. I mean, it was either say it that way, you know, say this person told me this and I can't identify them, or it was don't include that information. And I felt it was more useful to, I believe a lot of these people one day will be willing to go on the record, either when they've retired or when they're much older, or, you know, when maybe there's been regime change, and then they will be willing to be quoted, and then I can, you know, put their names in the reference notes. But it's very frustrating, of course, but this is inevitably what happens when you are dealing with a really repressive state, which does reach out and target people and take them out. You know, a lot of people have good reason to remain silent.
Thank you, Michela. Someone want to ask from Johannesburg, so let us ask this question. Okay.
Hello, Michela.
Hi.
How is the sound? It's good?
I can hear you, yeah. I can hear you.
Oh, it's more a comment. I don't know if you've ever been in Mozambique, but what you describe in your book, with Rwanda's presence now, the Rwandese Association, they became terrified. Journalists did disappear. Some of the members have been killed. Some of them kidnapped. In your viewpoint, do you think that will be good to dig this story as a team of journalists or going there alone? Consider all the situations which have been passing through to write your book. And the second question, by involving all the military, which are in Mozambique mainly to tackle the terrorism issue, do you think that behind this are other interests in a way to eliminate these dissidents or these refugees which have been living in Mozambique for a while? And because now they're talking. They've been saying, and we saw it happen recently, another head of the association was gunned down in Maputo. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for that question. It's an excellent question. I think this is a fascinating and deeply disturbing story, and I would encourage journalists in Mozambique and in South Africa to track it down. I'm aware, though, that Mozambique is not always a particularly media-friendly environment. But I think there has been the case of this high-profile businessman, Revocat Namanjingo, who has just been gunned down outside his house just recently, since Rwanda's military deployment in Mozambique. And even before the Rwandan force was deployed in Mozambique, we had seen the case of Castian, a journalist who had already been jailed in Rwanda on terrorism charges and had escaped from prison, and he had fled to Mozambique. And he's disappeared. He disappeared in May before the Rwandan troops were deployed in Mozambique. He's never been seen since. There have been credible reports that he was arrested by Mozambican police and handed in to the Rwanda High Commission. And we've also seen the murder of Louis Baziga a couple of years ago. We have also seen a very high-profile banker who was found, with his hands tied behind his back, floating face down in water several years before then. So there is a track record, a really well-established track record of the Rwandan community in exile in Mozambique being targeted in what look very much like state-sponsored assassinations. I know that there have been that the Refugee Association has expressed its concern, and they've staged a press conference, and they've said that they believe there are 20 names on the list of Rwandans who live in Mozambique who are going to be targeted. And I think, one of the things I find most sinister is that we know that the Rwanda High Commissioner, who is now based in Maputo, actually had been expelled from South Africa in 2014 because of the role he and a colleague had played in the attacks on Patrick Karegeya and on General Kayumba Nyamwasa. So what we seem to be seeing is a man who is very skilled at facilitating attacks on exiles, Rwandan exiles in South Africa, who's expelled for that, spends some time back in Kigali, and then is redeployed in Maputo to do exactly the same thing. And I know that my contacts in the Rwandan opposition believe that Maputo is going to be used, at the same time as the Rwandan troops are doing a really impressive job of sort of tackling the insurgency in Cabo Delgado, that the Rwandan High Commission is going to be a hub for attacks on a largely Hutu community who is seen, because of their ethnicity and the role they've played in the past, as being sort of unfriendly towards the Kigali state. So I think it's a really worrying story, and it definitely deserves to be closely followed.
Thank you. We have a last question from Nigeria. for you, Michela.
Morning.
Yes.
Hello. Good morning, Michela.
We can hear you.
Morning.
Okay. I just have one question, please. The investigation allowed you to meet witness. The first reserved for this witness after the publication of the book. I don't know what we want to do just to protect your witness.
Sorry, you wanted to know what I did to protect my witnesses. Is that it?
Yes. Yes.
Right. Well, to be honest, anonymity was the protection I offered. If my witnesses, firstly, I was always careful to meet them in circumstances that they dictated, you know, and we always met, you know, in the open places where they felt safe. But I've always followed the rule that if they say I don't want to be on the record, and they often would, and often they would say, not only do I not want to be on the record, I don't want you to say anything about me that will make it possible for someone in Kigali, for the officials in Kigali to identify me. Then I would oblige, or not use their testimony. But I've never exposed somebody against their wishes, because I just think it's you know, we know what Rwanda is doing, and it would be incredibly irresponsible. I don't want to have somebody's death or arrest, you know, on my conscience. So I've followed what they wanted, but the problem is that obviously in some cases means that your book loses credibility. But I can't criticize somebody who genuinely feels in danger for not wanting to go on the record. The people I do feel quite sort of annoyed with and do criticize are people like Western diplomats or development officials, or people who are in academia in the West, who are safe and have often got very strong opinions on Kagame and are very well aware of the campaign of intimidation and persecution and targeted assassination, and they won't say anything in public. And I sort of feel, because, you know, for personal reasons, because they want to work there, or they're friends with former officials, or you know, they don't want to sort of be seen in public being that confrontational. And you sort of feel, well, you know, people's lives are at stake and you have nothing at stake. Why don't you tell what you know? Because as long as you don't say what you know, it ends up being people like me who then get criticized and attacked on Twitter by the Kigali government, because they won't go public and they won't say what they know.
Thank you, Michela. I have to say we are very, very happy to see what you are doing about this book, and everybody are interested about what you these topics also, you know, surveillance topics is a relevant topics for all of us as journalists, and advices you share with us will help all of us to improve our skills, to help us to move forward on what we are doing about journalism topics. So we have to close this session, and I think everybody was very happy to hear you this morning, and I think we will continue to exchange. Maybe Wits University will facilitate all of us to get your book when you will be ready fully and available. So I don't think, if someone will say something, Anton, or because we close this session. So yeah, so thanks. I have to thank all of us to be here for these sessions.
Thank you very much, David. I really enjoyed it. I could keep talking on this subject forever, but it was nice to have this exchange.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We had a little difficulty there with some of the sound, and unfortunately there was a technical problem with the French to English translation. I understand the English to French was smooth. We are paying attention to it and we'll try and get it right, so apologies for that. Our next session is in an hour after lunch, although no, there aren't local sessions during this break, I don't think. So see you in an hour. Thank you very much to our speakers and for their patience with the technical problems. Thank you.
No worries.